You no. Okay, you're live.
Tanse, Erica Violetly, Nēhiyaw, and Miss Saskatoon, Egwa PSO, Oasis Nitotsen. My name is Erica Violetly, and I am happy and joyful and thankful to be here today with so many people that I admire and consider friends and solidarity workers in the struggles that we face across these lands. I'm coming to you today from inner city Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 lands. And this is where I grew up. This is where my communities lie, some of my communities. And this is where I write a lot of my poetry. So I guess I've recently started calling myself a poet, which seems like such a lofty title to take on. But whenever I think of, I think poet suits me better than academic. I'll say that much. But whenever I think, oh, poetry is can be so silly. It can be so meaningless. It can be so almost excessive and arrogant in a time when we're facing so much as people, when we're facing so much as workers, as Indigenous folks, as Black folks, as trans, queer, and two-spirit people, and as poor people. But there's a Christos quote. She's a Menominee Native American poet, and she says something like, I contend that any poetry that tries to play itself off as not being political is actually harmful, because all poetry is political, whether or not you're writing a poem specifically about politics, whether or not you name abolition in your poem. So all of my poetry is toward the idea of police and prison abolition. That's where I write from. So the first poem I'll read to you is called Freedom's Flight, and I wrote this for my friend Mito. In her dreams, she flies fast through the city with no IVs attached to her arms. In her dreams, there's a grocery store that serves wild berries and fresh, thick wild meat stews. Everyone takes what they need, and there's always enough. In her dreams, there is a community center that never closes. You can go there to bead and hear stories, to get healthcare, or maybe just a locker for storage. In her dreams, you get vaccines and don't have to worry about whether the government might be experimenting on you, or if you will leave the hospital unable to have babies because they didn't ask your consent before cutting you open or sewing you up. The thing about sickness is that it puts life in a suspended state. They say life, really living, will happen again after the recovery. But for those of us who live in a state that doesn't let us rest, being a good, productive citizen has always been a myth. They fill our heads with inspirational quotes about success and doing it now, about conquering the world. But some of us simply do not have the energy to do it now, nor do we wish to conquer anyone. So when you say conquest, I echo back to the concrete. No, we have never been conquered. Living with a disability, sickness, or madness makes the colonial demands of the city clear and unavoidable. The hostile unbreathability of its air to our lungs, how the air of the city is made unbreathable for our lungs, how the city's architecture is violent to our bodies and lives. Have you seen that viral video of the cockatoo tearing up anti-bird nesting spikes with its small beak? This brings into clear relief all the disruptions to be made. There are so many beautiful disruptions to be made. No one can survive on flower petals or poetry alone, but we all need a place to nest, so we might as well make our freedom fragrant and delicious like lavender. They lock us together in these ghettos and cages and make us fight for food and shelter. Here we still live. Here we organize. The next piece I want to read is called The Battle, and I wrote it for Colton Bushy. It was storming in the Battlefords after the bail hearing. I remember the smell of the rain on grass. I remember being in love and how the men with guns on rooftops were tiny, kneeled in comparison to the prairie sky. This is why I have faith in the ways we have learned to love until it's more powerful than the verdict of any judge, more powerful than any courtroom, more powerful than any queen, any piece of paper, any all-white jury, any killer walking away, until our love is more powerful than any prison, because crowns rust and paper rots and genocidal civilizations end. And genocidal civilizations end, and genocidal civilizations are ended. When we die in the process, our bodies go back into the earth. They become the clouds in the ocean. Kayas, a long time ago, in the spot where the courtroom now stands, a politician talks with a farmer about what he's heard around the fort, asks, do you think their dances can really make it rain? I'm going to finish because I think we have only a few minutes left, but I wanted to finish by starting these couple days of events with a poem by Cardinal, who was a friend of mine. This is Corey, who passed away last year, and he was a prison and prisoners justice advocate from inside the walls. I remember the time he told me that he had an article I had written on Indigenous feminism pinned to his prison, the wall of his prison cell. And that never left me. And he was one of the best organizers I've ever known. So I wanted to read one of his short poems called Where the Wild Sage Grows. I dream of perfect places and peaceful mornings. I walk in endless fields of wildflowers, willows and sage. I belong to the uncharted wild land and untamed prairies of blooming flowers where the wild sage grows, unafraid of dying, free and blowing in the wind, growing where it pleases amongst the majestic buffalo and antelope, in the spirit of freedom and the grace of beautiful wilderness. I let myself fall and am caught by the birds that grasp my spirit and carry me away to perpetual bliss. I am home. Corey, this is for you. Kanana Skomitin for your time.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you very much. And Erica Violet Lee will be reading again tomorrow for a longer time. Thank you.